I don't typically use Craigslist much, maybe less than once a year, to be honest. But occasionally it's the most convenient option when you need to sell something fast, especially if it's something that would be difficult to sell otherwise. However, after a particular incident about 3 years back, I swore off Craigslist for good. I was 22 years old at the time, residing in a tiny house with a roommate for over a year until he decided to move out. With the lease coming to an end in a few months and no one to split the rent with, I found myself unable to afford the property any longer. Consequently, I had to find a new place to live. Fortunately, locating an apartment wasn't overly challenging, although it was significantly smaller than the house we'd been staying in. This downsizing meant that I had to part ways with most of my furniture, including a couch that had seen little use. My roommate and I had purchased it just a little over a year prior when he moved in. It seemed wasteful to simply discard it by the roadside for anyone to claim. Given its value and the dire need for extra funds to facilitate my relocation, turning to Craigslist seemed like the logical choice. This marked my debut in selling items on the site, as I had always been on the buying end in the past. Prior to this, I hadn't encountered any strange occurrences, apart from the occasional awkwardness of stepping into a stranger's home and meeting them for the first time. However, assuming the role of the seller this time around, I felt considerably more at ease, since the transaction would take place in the comfort of my own home. After over 2 weeks, someone finally showed genuine interest in the ad and reached out to inquire about the item. He even called me to ask a few questions, which actually reassured me. I figured he was just being cautious, ensuring I wasn't some sketchy individual. His name was David, and he explained that he had recently moved into a new house and was in need of inexpensive furniture to furnish the space. I, on the other hand, disclosed that I was in the opposite situation. I was moving out of my house and into an apartment because my roommate had left, leaving me unable to afford the place on my own. Despite divulging perhaps more information than necessary, David sounded friendly, which put me at ease. We arranged to meet after our work shifts on a Saturday evening, roughly around 6 o'clock. When the appointed time arrived, I left the front door ajar and waited eagerly. Sitting on the couch, I patiently anticipated the arrival of the buyer for over an hour. Eventually, feeling disheartened, I decided to close the front door and head to the kitchen to prepare some food, assuming that the person had bailed on me. However, to my surprise, just minutes later, the doorbell chimed, signaling the arrival of the buyer. By 7:30, I was understandably a bit upset, but I mustered a fake smile and answered the door. "I'm David," he introduced himself, extending his hand for a handshake. David was a tall, hefty man, sporting a wide grin on his face. I shook his hand and welcomed him inside, leading him to the living room. He glanced around briefly, nodding in approval, just as I heard footsteps outside the front door, followed by its opening and the entrance of 2 more men. "Sorry, these are my buddies that are moving in with me. Hope you don't mind," David explained as 2 more men entered the house. "Oh, yeah, that's fine," I responded nervously, though deep down, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Despite attempting to convince myself otherwise, my unease persisted, refusing to be suppressed. David moved to the other side of the couch and crouched down as if examining something closely, then straightened up. "What's this over here?" he inquired, pointing down at the side of the couch, with the 2 other men looming behind me. Reluctantly, I approached, peering down at the couch. "I don't see anything," I remarked. He pointed again, indicating for me to take a closer look. The two men edged closer, positioning themselves in front of me while David hovered behind. With a growing sense of powerlessness and fear, I slowly knelt down and inspected the side of the couch, yet still found nothing amiss. "I'm just messing with you. There's nothing there," David reassured, delivering a firm pat on my back as I straightened up. I let out a nervous chuckle and instinctively took a few steps back. Glancing at the other men, I noticed unsettling, sinister grins creeping across their faces as they exchanged looks with David, as if conspiring. Despite my escalating anxiety, I struggled to maintain composure and devise an escape plan. They were in my home, and I felt paralyzed by fear, unable to muster the courage to ask them to leave.
"So, do you like it?" I queried, hoping to hasten the transaction. David glanced at his companions before returning his gaze to me. However, his cheerful demeanor had transformed into something more ominous. An eerie silence hung in the air as I locked eyes with David, sensing an impending threat. Suddenly, one of the men lunged at me, forcefully pinning me to the ground. Despite my instinct to resist, his overpowering strength subdued me, leaving me helpless and vulnerable. Surrendering to fear, I resigned myself to enduring the ordeal, praying that no further harm would befall me. David and his accomplice proceeded to ransack the entire house, seizing anything of value and leaving chaos and disarray in their wake. Meanwhile, the man who had pinned me down maintained his tight grip, pressing my head forcefully against the unforgiving wooden floor with all his might. After what felt like an eternity, David's voice pierced through the turmoil, signaling their departure. The assailant released me abruptly, allowing me to slump to the ground, overcome by shock, pain, and sheer terror. As their getaway vehicle roared to life and sped off into the night, I lay there, grappling with the harrowing aftermath of their brazen attack. After a few moments, I managed to pull myself together and stumbled towards the front door, laboriously securing it with a lock. Without hesitation, I dialed the authorities, urgently summoning help in the wake of the terrifying ordeal I had just endured. Unsurprisingly, it turned out that David wasn't his real name, and the contact details provided were merely false leads, leaving investigators with little to go on. Despite their efforts to gather evidence, including collecting fingerprints and photographing shoe prints left behind, the trail went cold, with no viable suspects identified. However, there was one crucial detail that emerged from their investigation. The shoe prints found at my residence matched those discovered at another property targeted in a similar attack a few weeks prior. Remarkably, that victim too had been alone at home, suggesting a pattern of targeting individuals who lived solo. Reflecting on the situation, I couldn't help but realize that my inadvertent disclosure about my former roommate had likely made me a more vulnerable target. It was a sobering realization that underscored the importance of exercising caution, especially when dealing with strangers in such precarious situations. In any case, the ordeal left me grappling with profound stress and anger. I had been naively lulled into a false sense of security within the confines of my own home, only to be ruthlessly exploited. This sobering experience served as a stark reminder of the inherent dangers lurking beneath the surface, particularly when it comes to online platforms like Craigslist. It's imperative that individuals remain vigilant and recognize the inherent risks associated with inviting unknown individuals, even those who may seem innocuous, into their homes. By raising awareness about the potential dangers and exercising caution,
we can better safeguard ourselves against falling victim to such nefarious schemes.